So welcome to another River Publishers book discussion, and my name is Philippa Jefferies, and with me I have another editor at River Publishers, Nicki, and I also have Steve Simske from Colorado State University. And they're both with me today to talk about the new River Publishers book series in document engineering, and the first book in that series, Steve's forthcoming book, Functional Applications of Text Analytics Systems, which looks at the different applications of various text analytics, and more about that in a bit. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. So as I've kind of said, this book is the start of a series in document engineering by River Publishers. Steve, would you just please start by explaining a bit about what document engineering kind of encompasses and its importance? And then maybe Nicki, perhaps you'd like to add some of your thoughts about this in the series.
Yes.
Absolutely. So document engineering, there is an annual symposium that the ACM puts on, and it's called the Document Engineering Symposium. That's been long running. It's been officially the Document Engineering Symposium since about 2001, so about 20 years. And there were various incarnations before that, but the bottom line is that it's about how to construct and present content to people that is both relevant to them. So it's salient content like summarizations, like analysis of content, but then also how to structure it, how to bring it out. So it's a very eclectic group, and it expands from, we've got like one of the world's experts in terms of how to use LaTeX, right? LaTeX, if you're not familiar with that, to folks who are doing more of the sort of document classification, analysis, and extraction. And so I'll let Nicki talk a little bit about how that series structures out, but as you'll see, it's a very eclectic and broad set of publications that we have planned.
Yeah, so I'd like to say that it came about of a lot of research of what are the areas that are underpublished and what should we do. But actually what happened was that the meeting that Steve wrote about was actually happening in Halifax, Nova Scotia, about 3 years ago. And so my job is to look for interesting new areas. And then when there was a new area and it was in Halifax, it was kind of a no-brainer. So I went down and sent my emails to the keynote speakers, of which Steve was one, and said, hey, can I buy you a coffee and let's have a chat? And then when someone said yes, I then had to quickly make sure that I researched the background to see. And then I had a great conversation with Steve, and we've been speaking kind of almost every 4 or 5 weeks ever since, even just if only for 2 or 3 minutes, just to keep things going. We've signed up another 4 really good books coming up, covering everything from like financial documents to music to sketch-based modeling. So I mean, it's every kind of document, and now we've got multimedia and all of the internet and all of that social media type documents. It's only grown in importance. So we've got I think we're going to be looking at stuff on probably LaTeX, on PDF, think of things as simple as that, but the standards that uphold PDF so that we can use it so much today need to be looked after by somebody, and there are experts out there doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I guess to the book itself. Steve, could you please talk a bit about text analytics, what that really means, what the key applications are? And I guess another question that comes from the title of your book is what you actually mean by functionality.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are a good set of questions. So first off, text analytics is a very broad area. It does certainly relate to document engineering, because if you think about it, a big part of engineering is also reverse engineering. And when you think about text analytics in particular, you're reverse engineering the content of a book or some other, publication. Some author has put something out, it may be, the author may be long dead, and you're trying to extract content out of that, which is pretty much like, let's say the US finds something from a Russian satellite on the beach, you bring in a bunch of engineers to reverse engineer it and figure out how that made it to where it is. And so it's the same type of thing. We want to look at the story behind content and how it got to where it was, how it got to that end game. That's what analytics are. And so it includes things like, for example, classifying and clustering, where you're assigning this book to a particular type of book. More interesting, perhaps, is summarizing the book, so that if somebody says, hey, I've only got an hour to devote to this would take 10 hours otherwise, give me an hour's worth of content. And then, of course, because we have an international audience, as do you, we want to make sure that people can translate properly. And so those are kind of the 3 pinnacles, if you will, of text analytics. You've got summarization, translation, and then associating it with a cluster or a class, indexing the book. And along the way, there's a lot of different stories that we try to tell in the book to show people how you get to those points. We try to do it with examples from the past, And so that's part of the functional aspect. One of the things we've realized, and now you see, there's a continual learning curve here for how machine learning and artificial intelligence goes. And now it's deep learning is the latest big thing. And so the problem with deep learning, of course, is that you also have to do deep unlearning. These algorithms get very tightly, very tightly trained on the data that they've been exposed to. What happens when you have new data? What happens when that data is no longer relevant? And so the functional part, Philippa, which you asked about, is that we want to be able to use systems that simultaneously train themselves and provide value in more than one area. And so that's where the functionality comes. We use a functional test rather than a training test to see how well something works. So I can give you one quick example. Suppose that you wish to translate an entire set of documents, and you also wish to translate a summarized set of documents. Both of these need to be translated. So you're in English, which is the primary language for a lot of our different translators and a lot of the different, and we actually show ways in the book to discern what language they were actually written in, which is pretty cool. But let's suppose we know it's English. So we take a whole set of content and we summarize it in English, and then we translate both the summarized content and the original content. In addition, we go get a bunch of search terms. And so River Publishers kindly did this for my book, right? And I thank you very much, right? You came up with a set of index terms that go in the back of the book. Those are search queries. And if we take those index terms and say which document out of a large set of documents, maybe the internet, right? A large set of documents, do these search terms align with? Let's translate those search terms while we translate either the summarized or the original documents and see which set of those terms work the best in the second language. That tells us our best translator. The behavior is the same in both languages for the search and the translated text. And so I never had to do any training. I never had to use, Amazon Mechanical Turk or go pay to get even better results, go pay somebody who's an expert in the field to do that. I just let the system itself be able to decide which of those translators are better by which one matches the search behavior with the actual classification behavior. And so that's what we're trying to do in the functional aspect of it, is be able to say, let's build a robust system that can do at least two things at once and then trade off those two between them. So for the nerds out there who know text analytics, things like expectation maximization, what you're doing there is trading off clustering and then trading off the definition of the cluster. So you assign everything to the closest point that they belong to, and then once you've assigned them, you redefine that point based on the centroid of what's there. So people who are familiar with those types of algorithms would really appreciate that you're trading two things off, and that allows you to optimize the system without me having to go find a Philippa or a Nicki who has the domain expertise. And I know you guys are underpaid, but we still have to pay you to do this, which costs a lot more than having the system do this.
There was some great parts of that Steve spoke about, that there are some instances where to translate something from, say, English to Finnish, it might be quicker to translate it from English to, say, French, and then from French to German and German to Finnish. That all might happen quicker because all those nodules, like the nodes of connectivity, work better to translate that way than to go directly to Finnish. So where you can find all sorts of clever ways about getting information around the web. And then that also works in reverse, that you can see that something that you expected to have been translated from Finnish has actually come to you from French, not so much from Finnish. So there are some really cool things. And I'm a statistician originally, so bits of it make me a bit too excited, but other people might not be so excited.
No, I have to tell you, that was a pleasure to have Nicki as my editor for this because of her background in statistics, and she'd come back to me with some exciting bit. And exactly along the lines of what Nicki said, I do reveal a story in there. I don't give you all the details in the book, but there was a time in the mid-aughts, so around 2006, 2007, if I remember, and I was working a lot with the HP site in Grenoble, and the French government came up to us and asked if we could, how we could most accurately translate Russian speech into French text. And I said, oh, worried about perhaps a diplomat being poisoned in France, are you? And it was like, I was trying to be flippant. And they said, how did you find out about that? And because that had just gone on in London previously to that, quite previously. Anyway, the point was, Nicki's memory is exactly right. The best way to do that in terms of accuracy was to actually take the Russian speech translated into French speech into French text, into English text, and then back over to French text. So there was a pathway in there that was rather convoluted that we would not have anticipated from the beginning, which was pretty cool. And so that's one of the little anecdotes in the book that's shared. So
that's good.
That's really interesting. And something Nicki kind of touched on earlier, nowadays there are so many ways, especially online, to make and transfer documents. You listed some of them earlier. I was just wondering, is this bringing challenges to document and text analytics and perhaps some of the translation stuff you were talking about?
Absolutely, and I think our book only scratches the surface of this. I think down the road you will actually see us get a world-renowned expert in translation to provide a book for the series. We did it functionally, which means that I don't have to actually be a good translator, but the world that's under there, we're banking on those, kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, or as I would say, understanding on the shoulders of giants, somebody else who's a really good translator. We will take their engine with various settings and then optimize the settings for that translation based on our functional approach. But there's a lot of room under the hood for those domain experts who are coming up with the new deep learning algorithms, coming up with the new translation algorithms, and we're very excited about that. That's some of the books that we anticipate further down the road.
Yeah, and this also works for things like plagiarism, just very simply, is that every River, we publish journal articles as well. In fact, I'm in the journal kind of hub office here. And every single paper goes through a plagiarism check and solidly through. And the things that build these plagiarism checks are based on these kind of, on these analytic things. So that we can be very specific when we go back to an author to say, these sections have been copied from these papers and you can't use them. And this is why.
Yeah.
And they're always amazed by just how clever those things are getting. But they have to be clever because people are cheating. So we're on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Nicki, because if you're down at the functional level, of course, anything except a neologism, anything other than a word you've invented is going to have occurred
in another document somewhere. Yeah.
So there's a real trade-off: how long versus how short. Yeah.
Yeah, if the paper's on whatever, sketch-based modeling, then what happens is sketch-based modeling gets highlighted as being plagiarized from that, and it's like, no, we have to. So we can fine-tune it at this end. We could say only more than 50 consecutive words copied, or only this, only that, so that and not the author's own stuff, or not something that's been published more than 100 years ago, or there's ways that you can affect what algorithms kind of map on. Otherwise, the other thing is, obviously references come up a lot, because if I write a paper, I might reference some of Steve's papers, obviously, but then what comes up is that's in someone else who's referenced it, and so it looks like I plagiarized my references. It's like, no, I'm actually citing something. That's fair use. So you have to be. It's a very blunt object at the moment, and then we fine tune it to make sure that it gives us what we need.
Yeah, and so you come back to functional, Philippa, you asked about that. This would be another area that's ripe for functional applications. For example, if I'm able to take Nicki's document that she's properly cited and I throw it into a classifier and it classifies it as a document belonging to Nicki, we're probably over the plagiarism problem.
Yeah.
If it classifies it as a document belonging to, let's say, Steve, instead of Nicki, then we may have an issue with plagiarism. Then she may have copied too many quotes, and it's really just a mashup of words coming from me. But again, a functional way of saying, is there plagiarism, versus this real trade-off that we have to have. How long do you make it before you, decide that it's not plagiarized, et cetera? And so that's a real issue. And again, functional ways of doing that allow somebody who's maybe not even a neophyte, but just somebody who's not a domain expert to come in and make good use of translation, of summarization, et cetera, without them having to know all of the, the basics of that. Now, we do go through the basics, of course, of text analytics in the book. It is a text analytics book. And so anybody reading the book will find out, oh, wow, this is more than I ever wanted to know about summarization and classification. But we don't do that for translation, because that's beyond text analytics. So that's a primary area where we say we're going to take a functional approach. And I'm hoping that the book shows people both how to be a practitioner in certain areas that are more relevant to text analytics, and then how to use those text analytics skills to go do functional things in exciting areas like translation that you'd be like, I'm not going to do that, right? But now I can use it. I can make good use of it. And that's what we're hoping happens for our readers.
And the students for your book there, it's a master's course, is it? Is it a
Maybe
postgraduate
masters, you
course?
could get some, you know, in our university, that would be a 500 level course where you could have your, you know, 4th or 5th year students taking it, or your masters or PhDs.
Well, I think you get people from
it's definitely a graduate course.
Engineering, you're getting people from a whole variety of backgrounds probably coming to it, which is quite nice.
Absolutely, yeah. It's for, you could even make good use of it in, well, certainly in CS, CIS, or engineering. But you could also see people in, you know, English and literature, and you know, some of the liberal arts making good use of library sciences, obviously, and then even business. In business, because they're, you know, if you go to a business school these days, they're really, really focused on analytics. You know, up to the minute analytics, how to make good use of analytics in business. In essence, is the most functional analytic there can be, right? They're taking advantage of unstructured data. You know, things like, you know, opinions really matter, right, in terms of where business goes. What are people saying on the street? Look at the stock market, how, you know, amenable it is to people's opinion. And so, yeah, there is a very broad set of audiences, I think, that can benefit from this book.
Great. And then possibly one of my last questions. You've mentioned it a bit, so I was wondering how kind of AI, deep learning, those things you were talking about, and other key technology innovations we're seeing are kind of developing the way we use text analytics or in some of the applications.
They really are. And one of the things that we've looked at is being able to take advantage of the existing deep learning applications. So a lot of those are focused on, you know, in 2014, AlexNet basically made a lot of the previous types of image classification that I did, you know, deprecated it. They weren't relevant because deep learning was so much better. So you would be sweating over whether an SVM or a Bayesian network did, you know, 94, 95%, and then you'd throw an AlexNet or a GoogleNet at it, and it would get 99.3% or something. And you're like, okay, my days of beating that are over. And so what we're really looking at is how to use those as components. And one of the things you can do is actually take text and then reframe it to be able to use these important two-dimensional approaches to deep learning. So for example, if you've got an image, you might throw it into a convolutional neural network. You can actually take text and then reframe it so that it becomes an image, and throw that in there, get the deep learning out of that, and extract content out of that. And so that sort of, you know, multi-directional transduction of information is really interesting to us. I don't really call that in the book, but the transduction, being able to take text, move it into another field and do your analysis in that field, and then transform it back, is of a lot of interest to us. And so that's something we definitely talk about. But yeah, the book is really counting on those types of, you know, brilliance to be there. We're counting on there to be brilliant translations, there to be, you know, brilliant algorithms for that, and we step on those, use those in functional systems to extract even more value out of those. Yeah,
you think where apps are going, every app developer needs to do everything on their app in all the languages, and so they will use these tools. They will use the deep learning behind all of that, how people use it. So that's the best way to use all that big data. Big data is great, but no one brain can look at it. But with deep learning, we've got millions of brains, so we get all the data. I mean, that's some of the other areas I work in. They're using a lot of machine learning and deep learning on images. So for healthcare, and it's just millions and millions and millions of every person who's ever had a scan. All of that information is there, and then now they can turn it around and predict in the future. So now they can see a scan of someone who hasn't got it yet, but can predict whether or not they're going to get it. So they're so clever. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I think we'll be doing something on imaging, aren't we? We're going to try and get an imaging book in, because although the series is about documents, images are regarded as documents.
Images are part of it. Well, we do have upcoming books on music and on financial documents as well as examples. So it is a broad field, and how images interplay. I mean, it's a great point. I mean, not to get too philosophical here, but there's a lot of people concerned that we're in a post-literate world, right? And we actually have to convey a lot more through, you know, images and through videos than we ever had to before. How do you actually get text to interplay in that, right? And so an obvious one for translation is that you've got the little subtitles there that are telling you when you're watching, you know, a movie in Finnish or something, what it is in English, right? So and if it's done properly, you hardly notice you're doing that.
Yeah.
Right? So.
That's quite topical because I, even though I'm based in Canada, I listen to the BBC News. But there was a story in the news today about the idea that actually having subtitles on, even in English language programs, English subtitles on as the default would help children read much better than they currently do, because they're watching TV so much they never get to read, and so they're going to try and change it so that's the default. So it's just like a little thing that's happening now to try to get people to read words, because
that makes total
we're
sense.
nothing if not topical here at River Publishing. We're right on it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if we watch something on the BBC, if it's a Liverpudlian, there'd better be a translation. There, us Americans are going to have no chance. So.
I like it when I watch those kind of Finnish crime stories, and as I'm watching it, I'm not aware that I'm reading Finnish, and I look away, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I don't understand what they're saying. It's like I just made the connection so quickly that I assume I'm thinking in Finnish. Clearly, I'm not thinking in Finnish. I'm just, but they can do it so seamlessly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, that was going to be my last question. Kind of really was whether either or both of you like to say a final thought about this topic, or what we can look forward to from the new series in document engineering.
Yeah. Let me just express my excitement. First off, thanks to River Publishers for making this happen. I think this has been just a glorious opportunity for the DocEng community. We are not going to be resting on our laurels, off of this book. We've got several more in the works. There's already 4 more that are in advanced stages. We will be soliciting more authors who have a document flavor to them. So if you're watching this and you've got that book burning under the hood that you really want to get in contact with one of us, we'd love to see it happen. But this is going to be an ongoing book series, and we really think that engineering of documents is central to the future of how people learn and how people share information. So we really do, I feel particularly jazzed about how this moves forward because of how important it is for how we structure our learning.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, I agree with Steve. I think we're seeing it, we're going to see it sort of stretch into content and document engineering, because the line between content and document is blurred, so we're broadening that. But yeah, I think there's great opportunities and some really interesting things, and I really like a series that can have books on finance, books on music, books on text, books on images, all in the same. I think that's quite exciting publishing. So.
Yeah, we're out there for the polymaths, and I mean, I'm representing the DocEng community, but there's people far smarter than me who've been participating in that community for many years, and I think we were hoping to, unlock a lot of that potential there for some of the books down the road, and I think you'll be pleased as you continue to read this series.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm afraid we may have to end it there, but thank you both very much for joining me today to talk about the series and the upcoming books.
You're
Thank
most
you, Philippa. Appreciate it.
Great.